Hi, everyone. Todd Rosenbluth of TMX VettaFi. And as you can see, I'm joined by Tim Rotolo in our New York office. Tim, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having us.
Well, we're here to talk about nuclear energy, and in particular, why you and I think many people also believe this is a perfect time to be looking at nuclear energy.
Sure. So we've thought nuclear energy was a incredible solution to the world's power problems. I think that's been brought to the fore by, several macro events, and then obviously the emergence of AI. So I think the Russian invasion of Ukraine really was an awakening for global governments and the populace that, energy is it is national security. And so when you lose access to energy and prices spike, it's incredibly painful, not only to lower income people, but also to businesses. And I think that has brought to the fore that there is a real need for constant low carbon baseload power. And nuclear for a long time was a little bit of a redheaded stepchild in that the green movement had kind of made it so that wind and solar were viewed as the only kind of clean solutions. But I think now we've realized that in order to prosper as a globe, and particularly now with AI and the amount of electricity that's going to be needed, we need all of the above. But nuclear is actually, if you think about like the Venn diagram of all the things you would want, it is right in the middle. It's clean, it's safe, it's base load, and it's incredibly scalable. I guess the only potential knock against it, that's not kind of, just like scary propaganda, is it's just expensive to build and it takes a long time, but we can get better at that.
So let me delve into a couple of those things there.
Yeah.
You mentioned AI.
Yep.
Is that the major catalyst for people who are looking to invest in this through an ETF?
I think it is a big one, certainly. It's the most prominent one that we have today. But for probably the last 5 years, we've seen growth in nuclear, a lot of it in China, a tremendous sentiment shift in Europe, again, in the early 2020s around the Russian invasion. So, for instance, the French went from saying that they were going to actually reduce their nuclear fleet, they get about 75% of their power from nuclear, to expanding it. And that happened several years ago. And so I think you've seen this slow transition towards interest in nuclear, and it's been dramatically accelerated by AI. And so that will certainly be a huge driver. And again, you've seen just in the recent couple of years, you've seen a couple of restarts like Palisades. And a lot of that has been driven by, Microsoft and Meta and Amazon saying, we need power and we are willing to pay for it. And so that partnership between big tech and nuclear has been a real driver. And I think that will continue to be a driver. But it's not the only one. It's, the entire globe is waking up to the idea that if we want to decarbonize and electrify, nuclear is probably the single best solution.
So I imagine one of, if not the most common objection is nuclear energy is dangerous. I think people still have in their minds about a nuclear bomb and,
Yep.
and things not going well. Do you think that's a legitimate concern?
I really don't. It's actually, if you look at the data, it's the single safest form of power per terawatt hour produced. So it's safer than wind, it's safer than solar, it's certainly safer than fossil fuels. And it doesn't, what people miss about the waste piece is, number one, it's calculated into the cost of actually operating a nuclear power plant. There's all these negative externalities around coal, right? No one pays for the coal pollution. The people who produce nuclear power pay for it. And then it's stored in these incredibly safe casks. And so basically all of the nuclear waste that the world has ever produced can be put inside of a football field about 10 feet deep. So it's been made this boogeyman, but a lot of it is just the green movement wanted to take power away from nuclear. But it is, there's been 3 incidents, right? You've had Chernobyl, first 3 Mile Island, and Fukushima most recently. But even Fukushima, that was a tsunami that hit a reactor that was on the water. And so more people died from the tsunami than the actual nuclear radiation. So I think it's one of these things that's bandied about that's people don't really understand. They just kind of say it as a headline in order to scare people away from nuclear. But again, I think the only negative about nuclear, the biggest negative is that the regulatory framework is such that the people trying to develop nuclear power can't take any risk. And so because if it's not 100% safe, right, not 99.9.995, it's 100% safe. And so that adds extreme costs to the development of new nuclear power. And what's been fantastic about this administration, and it was just, out recently with a number of new pronouncements in favor of nuclear, is they're trying to reduce some of the regulatory red tape to lower the costs and accelerate the development of nuclear. And that's been missing. That's one of the reasons why nuclear hasn't grown faster. But it's also why that partnership of big tech and nuclear is so powerful, because the big tech groups have incredible lobbying power. And I think they're also making a real economic case for why we need nuclear power.
So let's say the audience agrees that nuclear energy is a relevant investment theme. How does it fit into a broader portfolio?
It's very thematic. It is a high growth industry, so it's certainly equity oriented. So looking at where you're having global equity exposure, because it is a very global industry. There's a lot of Japanese companies, a lot of European companies. There's clearly a lot of U.S. companies, but so I think you're looking at a kind of a high growth global equity allocation. And then depending on how advisors think about it as a thematic or satellite position, taking it from one of those buckets. But, we expect it to be a secular growth theme. It's a bit different from the uranium theme, which is a bit more cyclical in nature. And so for investors who have kind of a long-term orientation and they want to take some exposure away from that global growth bucket, I think this is a great place to add that exposure.
Well, thanks, Tim. Thanks for joining me in the office.
Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you for tuning in. You want to learn more about nuclear energy, visit the Nuclear Energy Content Hub on ETF Trends or ETF Database. We'll see you soon.